welcome Steve Bannon of Steve Bannon's War Room and Ben Smith of Semafor.
Look at that. Your fans are here, or one of them. Thank you, sir.
I want to thank my agent.
So I was just thinking, we were here a year ago, talking about the administration, talking about MAGA, and I think then it felt like your wing of the Republican Party was ascendant. A year later, Trump's at war in the Middle East. He's doing a deal with China. You're fighting him over deportations. So what happened?
I don't know, fighting him. Look, first of all, we were ascendant on those policies, and we'll be ascendant again. President Trump just announced, I think, a peace deal in the Middle East, peace deal with Lebanon. We'll see how it works out. I think the blockade's very strong. But people shouldn't lose the fact that the populist nationalist movement in this country has got a lot of muscle, right? Right now, we've had a huge victory in Texas. We're fighting to a draw in Virginia. If you look in South Carolina, Lindsey Graham's below 50%. So we got a lot of stroke, and I think people are getting very motivated. Some of the policies are maybe not totally aligned, but President Trump's our leader, and I realize there's been a lot of noise out there about President Trump and the war and maybe some of our alliances, but I think this movement at its core, particularly on the core issues, is stronger than ever.
But can you give me your sense and of basically how the administration has gone so far? Kind of periodize it for me a little. Like there was a period where it just felt like this was Steve Bannon flood the zone being quoted constantly, and really the policies were coming from the populist wing, and it felt, I don't know, I guess I put it at the first Iran bombing when it felt like that stopped and we went in a different direction. But how do you see it?
Well, because remember, the 4 years we had in the wilderness, we had a political operation, which was the precinct strategy to really become very proficient in getting out low information, low propensity voters, which led to the 22 and the 24 victory. In addition, we had public intellectuals that stepped up and did, like Russ Vought, who's Secretary of OMB right now, that did Center for Renewing America, Project 2025. So those first 6 months, when I was here last year, we were the beneficiary of 4 years of being in the wilderness, but with policies, cadres, we had networks of people that came in the administration, they were filling up. Sergio Gore was personnel. So we had the non-Senate confirmed. So when we were here last year and all the way through the June bombing, we were on a roll. But as Washington does, right, the lobbyists and the corporations and the donors, and I think, I'm not saying we're off track. I think some of these are not as hard and tough as we want to be. And I keep telling people, President Trump in this movement he created is a moderate. After President Trump, and really the muscle, a lot of the muscle in our movement is much farther right than President Trump, and much harder, much more nationalistic than even President Trump is. So I think you're going to see a resurgence of that. I'm actually very optimistic about November. I think November we're going to hold the House. I think if we can get the Senate to do anything, we can actually hold the Senate, and they look grim right now. But I see grassroots people out there that are thirsting to get back into the fight and thirsting to fight for these policies. I think a few changes of these policies, and we're going to get people back out there, and I feel better than ever in our movement.
And this is
and I know it works because the first, up until the bombing in Iran, and even remember that bombing was not as bad as it could have been because the greatest ally in the world wanted regime change. And President Trump did total obliteration of the nuclear program, which still rolls through the day. It's one of the reasons that they're talking about this deal that he might go to Islamabad and do because of the beginnings of that bombing. So
was that sarcasm? Do you not think they're the greatest ally in the world?
No, I do not think they're the greatest ally in the world. In fact, I think the only worst allies you could have are the Arab allies we've got in the Gulf. I think Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, I don't think any of them are any good, right? They're double dealing us all the time. Right now, I think the strategy is perfect with the blockade. As soon as we get this sorted out with the Chinese Communist Party, I keep saying the Middle East is a sideshow and Israel's a sideshow to a sideshow. We've got to pull back. We have to pull back the hemispheric defense, the Central Pacific as the strategic pivot, like Mackinder said, the Eurasian landmass. The heartland is the pivot for Eurasia. The pivot for the United States is that vast Pacific, as the giants in the 19th century knew. So I think we pull back here, and this is how we control the world, is through hemispheric defense and controlling the Pacific. We're a Pacific nation. But no, I think we got to get out of the Middle East. I think our Arab allies are terrible. And I think Israel shows you that they go their own way every time.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about the kind of business and the lobbyists. There may be a couple lobbyists in this room. You can raise your hands or not. But certainly a business-heavy crowd. And that has been, I've spent a lot of time with you over the last year, and kind of my observation has just been that, like, it just feels like in Washington, like, the money always wins when there's a conflict right now. And I think that's sort of what you observe too. Why is that? Why do you think that, like, the kind of movement right is getting rolled by the kind of corporate right?
It doesn't always get rolled. What I said last time also, I said, hey, you're going to have two choices. You're going to have Mangione, or you're going to have what turned out to be Mandami, right? You're going to have, and Mandami's populism on the left actually thinks it's more of neo-Marxism and jihadism. But, but it's very effective. What they've done is copied us on how to get out the vote. The Working Family Party and DSA down in Texas, where they won some big state elections. These people are just like us. They get out and get low propensity voters. You should not discount them. They're very, very tough. But when we say the money wins, what I tell the money, you're only digging yourselves into a deeper hole. Because right now we're heading to, I think, crisis after crisis. And you can see this in this country with the information state, particularly what's happening with AI. If you look at young people, young men of Hispanic, black, white right now, they're getting more and more, some to the left, but a lot to the right. These people are much more nationalistic, and we're going to get to what I say, if you don't address this now with policies that can work for working class people, you're going to go for, because our movement right now is more populist than nationalist. It's going to get to be more nationalist. And after that, you're going to become ultra-nationalist. And when I say ultra-nationalist, that means foreign capital out, foreigners out. It's going to be tough, so we've got to solve these problems today.
And I think when you said this a year ago, like you've got a choice between Steve Bannon and Luigi Mangione, I think people were kind of like pretty freaked out. There is a lot.
They didn't know which one to choose, right?
I think people in Washington right now are much less worried that that's going to be the choice, and I wonder. And you say you think Republicans are gonna take the House. That's a very if you bet on that on Calshir politics, you're gonna make a lot of money.
When you say that, look at John Cornyn. John Cornyn spent $80 million to $100 million, the same old playbook to destroy Ken Paxton. We went down to Texas with Gert Wilders and Glenn Beck in January. We had a proposition on the ballot. We put a proposition on it to galvanize people. That was to prohibit Sharia law in the state of Texas. Also to have, that's funny? Is that funny? Okay, fine. You're going to see how funny it is. We're prohibiting Sharia law in Texas, and we're going to shut down a lot of this nonsense that's going on. The next thing we're going to shut down is the H-1B visas. People in the United States, citizens of this country, are not prepared to have this. You may think it's funny. Folks in Texas don't think it's funny. Folks in South Carolina don't think it's funny. And this is that seething anger right below the surface. Because the global elites, you sit there and mock these people like they don't count, like African Americans don't count, working class Hispanics don't count, working class whites don't count. That is the backbone of this country. And trust me, that is a latent political power that is being turned into a political power. So no, we're going to ban Sharia law in this country. We've already designated in Texas the Muslim Brotherhood and CARE as terrorist organizations, as has many in the Gulf Emirates. So no, this is very serious. We got 2 million votes on that proposition and galvanized the Paxton team to actually now lead, I think, Cornyn by 8% with no money. Cornyn spent $80 to $100 million. Lindsey Graham, right now, the globalist, is under 50% in South Carolina. So the populist movement, when you look at really victories we can have, is more powerful than ever, and it's only going to get more powerful over time. So laugh all you want, but he who laughs last laughs best. And the people in this country are not going to tolerate what you stand for. You stand for the destruction of this country, the sovereignty of this nation. And you look for the destruction of American citizens. The system that is going to come in place is not simply America first. It's American citizens first. American citizens have to have a better deal than any foreigners here. They have to have a better deal than any illegal alien. And that day is coming.
I think a lot of your fights have been inside the right, the ones that you're talking about the Texas primary. But you also have some sort of, I think, are building some unusual coalitions. And I'm specifically thinking about AI. What are you kind of hearing and feeling from the base about artificial intelligence and about the big AI companies?
The American people have turned off about it. Look what happened in New Mexico. Well, first off, you talk about populism. Look at what's happened in the trial yesterday with Live Nation. First time in 45 years at a jury trial, the little guy stood up and said, "You're an illegal monopoly, you have to be broken up." Look what happened in New Mexico with Meta. It was a 4 or 5 week trial that took an hour to determine, and in Los Angeles, where the little guy gets a voice and a vote. He votes against everything you guys stand for, and particularly these out of control AI companies. Right now, we stopped the amnesty bill, preemption, in the Big Beautiful bill. We stopped it again in the NDAA, the must pass. The White House came out with their framework. I think that's already shattered. David Sachs essentially relieved for cause for not delivering. And this is a coalition of the left and the right. And quite frankly, the right is now just starting to stand, not the leaders of the right, but people in these states. Ron DeSantis, very smart person, yesterday said, "I'm calling a special session to bring people back to essentially decelerate artificial intelligence." They can't use the excuse we've had a Sputnik moment and it's the Chinese Communist Party. That's the fear. We cut the chips off. I don't care what NVIDIA wants to do.
Just to go back, why are people upset about AI?
Because first off, the damage it's doing to kids, what it's doing to the country, what it's doing to jobs, but most importantly, it's like mythos. When we had nuclear power, right? You remember from the Oppenheimer movie, you had the Atomic Energy Commission. You had some sort of at least modicum of a regulatory apparatus. These oligarchs want absolutely no control. They are radical accelerationists. And we know now from mythos that they're the first guys to say, "Hey, look, this thing is out of control. We can't even put it out." So we have to have controls of artificial intelligence. We cannot just be accelerationists. And that means some modicum of regulatory control. Right now in this city, they are plotting with Speaker Johnson to, I think, since they've lost 3 times, to take a preemption bill that preempts all state regulations and to put it in a must-pass legislation. I think they're going to try to do it in reconciliation and try to do the Save America Act. So they'll say to the right, "Oh, you guys want to make sure that there's no more way to cheat. You're going to have to take AI." That's not going to work. AI behind the scenes with the populist right is, I think, actually right next to immigration, our top issue. And people are galvanized by this. And you can see DeSantis, as smart as he is, really calling back for a special session to deal with it.
Do you think in Anthropic's conflict with the Department of War, do you think Anthropic had it right?
I think Anthropic had it right. I think Anthropic, it's very, very complicated. I really respect Pete Hegseth. We were the leaders in getting Pete confirmed, our show. I have tremendous respect for them over there. But I think in this situation, right, it's almost too dangerous. And I think we have to then have it coming together about it. That's why you need a sort of atomic energy commission. You need some sort of modicum of regulatory, not just about the kids, the chat GPTs and the suicides. That's bad enough. It's terrible. Not just about our copyright holders paid for. But the central thing is what is happening in the weapons lab with AI. We have no earthly idea. Mythos Review just gets dropped on you. You have no earthly idea what's going on. We can't do that. And we cannot particularly turn it over to Elon Musk and Meta. And you saw what a jury, when a jury had a shot at Zuckerberg, you saw what they did. That's only going to get worse. We have to come together and figure this out. And you can't jam people by putting it into a must-pass.
We're almost out of time, but a final question. Is J.D. Vance heir to the MAGA movement? Is he the heir apparent?
I don't think MAGA has President Trump. And as you know, I'm a huge advocate of President Trump's 3rd term. So right now, I think...
You're not just saying that to mess with J.D.?
No, not at all. I think you guys all paid your taxes here yesterday. Are there anyone in the room who would not vote for President Trump and what he's trying to do with this economy? President Trump is...
I can't imagine, but we're out of time, so we'll have to pick that up. Thank you, Steve.